Once upon a time, in a small village where the sun smiled down on the red earth, there lived a girl named Rosemary. She was known for her beauty and her sharp mind. I remember when she first came into town, her eyes sparkled with dreams bigger than our skies, and her laughter carried the kind of hope that made you believe anything was possible. Rosemary's arrival caused quite a stir. She wasn't like the other girls in the village. She was bold, confident, and determined to make something of herself. When she got a job at the local office, everyone said she was lucky. The office was run by Mr. Bernard, a man with a booming laugh and a belly that shook like thunder when he chuckled. He had a reputation for being generous, but also for having an eye for fine things, and soon enough for Rosemary too. "Work hard and you'll climb up the ladder," Mr. Bernard would say, his gaze lingering on Rosemary as she moved through the office. And work hard she did. Rosemary stayed late when others had gone home, took on extra tasks that weren't hers to handle, and always made sure her work stood out. Before long, people began to notice changes in her life. She started dressing differently: sleek skirts, high heels that clicked against the tiled floors, and blouses that hugged her figure just right. Whispers began to swirl around the office. "Did you see Rosemary's new phone?" someone asked one day. "And that gold watch?" another chimed in. "Where do you think she's getting all this money?" One afternoon during lunch, Rosemary flicked her wrist so the sunlight caught her watch. "See this new watch?" she said with a proud smile. "Hard work pays." I wanted to believe her words, but something about them didn't sit right with me. Rosemary had always been ambitious, but now there was something different about her, a hunger that went beyond hard work. The whispers grew louder as Mr. Bernard started giving her special treatment. She got her own corner in the office, invitations to private meetings, and even trips out of town for business purposes. It seemed like Rosemary had everything she ever wanted. But ambition can be a double-edged sword. What we didn't know then, what none of us could have imagined, was how far Rosemary was willing to go to have it all. As the weeks passed, Rosemary's success at Bernard & Co. continued to grow. She was no longer just an employee. She had become Mr. Bernard's right hand. They were seen together often, laughing and discussing projects in his office, while the rest of us watched from a distance. It was hard not to feel a twinge of jealousy mixed with concern. One afternoon, I overheard a conversation between two coworkers in the break room. "Have you noticed how close Rosemary and Mr. Bernard have become?" One whispered. "It's like he only has eyes for her now." The other nodded, her brow furrowed. "I hope she knows what she's doing." He's not exactly known for being loyal. I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. I wanted to defend Rosemary, to believe that her hard work was the reason for her rapid rise. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to their relationship than met the eye. One evening, as I was leaving the office, I saw Rosemary sitting in Mr. Bernard's office, her laughter ringing out like music. The door was slightly ajar, and I could see her leaning over his desk, animatedly discussing a project. I paused for a moment, feeling a mix of admiration and unease. "Rosemary," I called out as I stepped inside. "Are you still working?" She looked up, her smile brightening the room. "No, Alice. Just wrapping up some details with Mr. Bernard." "I'll be done soon." Mr. Bernard flashed me a charming smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "We're just going over some strategies for the upcoming campaign," he said smoothly. I nodded, but couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. As I left the office, I glanced back at Rosemary, who seemed so engrossed in her work that she didn't notice my concern. The next day, she came into the office looking different, more polished than usual, with her hair perfectly styled and a new dress that hugged her curves just right. "Wow, Rosemary. You look amazing," I exclaimed. "Thanks," she replied with a grin. "Just trying to make an impression." Her words sent chills down my spine. Was she really just trying to impress Mr. Bernard? Or was there something more sinister happening behind closed doors? As days turned into weeks, it became clear that Rosemary was getting everything she wanted, but at what cost? The whispers about her relationship with Mr. Bernard grew louder, and I could see the toll it was taking on her. One evening after work, as we sat together at our favorite cafe, I decided to confront her gently. "Rosemary," I began cautiously, "are you sure you're okay? You've been spending so much time with Mr. Bernard lately." She waved me off with a laugh, but then sighed deeply. "Alice, you don't understand how cutthroat this industry can be. If I want to succeed, I have to play the game. But at what cost?" I pressed gently. She looked away for a moment before meeting my gaze again. "I know what I'm doing," she insisted, but there was a flicker of doubt in her eyes. That night, as we parted ways, I couldn't shake the feeling that Rosemary was walking a dangerous line, a line that could lead to her downfall. As Rosemary continued to rise in her career, the whispers around the office grew louder. It was hard to ignore the tension that filled the air. Some of our coworkers were supportive, while others were clearly envious. I watched as Rosemary became more entangled with Mr. Bernard, and it made me uneasy. One afternoon, I overheard a conversation between two employees in the break room. "Did you see how Mr. Bernard looked at her during the meeting?" One said, shaking his head. "It's like she's his favorite toy." The other replied, "I've heard rumors that he's been giving her special treatment. It's not fair to the rest of us." I felt a pang of worry for Rosemary. She was talented and hardworking, but this attention from Mr. Bernard seemed to come with strings attached. I couldn't help but think about the risks involved in their relationship. One evening, as I was leaving work, I saw Rosemary sitting in Mr. Bernard's office again. This time, the door was closed. My heart raced as I thought about what could be happening inside. Was this just a business discussion, or was it something more? The next day, I decided to talk to her about it again. "Rosemary," I said cautiously during lunch, "are you sure everything is okay with Mr. Bernard? You know how people talk." She rolled her eyes, brushing off my concern. "Alice, you're overthinking it. He's just a mentor helping me succeed. But what if it goes too far?" I pressed gently. "You know how office romances can end badly." Her expression hardened for a moment before she softened again. "I can handle it, Alice. I'm not naive, I know what I'm doing." But deep down, I felt a growing sense of dread. The stories about office romances often ended with heartbreak and chaos, favoritism, jealousy, and sometimes even harassment claims. That evening, as we walked home together, I shared my worries about how office relationships could lead to complications. "There are so many risks involved," I said. "What if things don't go well? What if he starts expecting more than just your work?" Rosemary shrugged it off again, but didn't look me in the eye. "I'll be fine," she insisted. As days turned into weeks, the atmosphere in the office shifted further. Employees began to take sides. Some admired Rosemary for her ambition, while others resented her for what they perceived as special treatment from Mr. Bernard. One afternoon, I overheard a heated discussion between two coworkers outside the break room. "Can you believe Rosemary?" one said angrily. "She thinks she can just waltz in and get everything handed to her because of him." The other replied, "It's not right. She's talented enough without all this drama." I felt torn between wanting to support my friend and worrying about the consequences of her choices. It was becoming clear that Rosemary was playing a dangerous game, a game that could cost her more than just her job. As the days turned into weeks, the tension in the office grew thicker. Rosemary was becoming more entangled with Mr. Bernard, and I could see the toll it was taking on her. She was still ambitious, but there was a shadow creeping over her bright smile, a shadow that hinted at the consequences of her choices. One afternoon, I noticed Rosemary sitting alone in the break room, staring blankly at her phone. I approached her, concern etched on my face. "Hey, what's wrong?" You look stressed." She sighed heavily, running a hand through her hair. "I just got off the phone with Mr. Bernard. He wants me to come in this weekend to work on a special project. Isn't that a bit much?" I asked cautiously. "You've been working non-stop." Rosemary shrugged, trying to play it cool. "It's just part of the job. If I want to keep moving up, I have to show that I'm dedicated." But something about her tone felt off. It wasn't just dedication. It felt like pressure to please Mr. Bernard in ways that went beyond work. The following week, things took a turn for the worse. I overheard a heated argument between Mr. Bernard and another employee in the hallway. "You can't keep giving her special treatment," the employee shouted. "It's not fair to the rest of us." Mr. Bernard's voice boomed back. "I know what I'm doing. Rosemary is an asset to this company." I felt my heart race as I listened from around the corner. It was clear that the favoritism was causing resentment among our coworkers, and I couldn't help but worry about Rosemary's position. Later that day, I found Rosemary sitting at her desk, looking even more stressed than before. "Rosemary," I said gently, "are you sure you're okay? This situation with Mr. Bernard seems really intense." She looked up at me with tired eyes and sighed. "I know people are talking, Alice. But I can handle it. Can you?" I pressed softly. "What if it gets out of hand? What if he starts expecting more from you?" Her expression hardened for a moment before she softened again. "I'm not naive. I know how to play the game," she insisted. But as the days went by, it became harder to ignore the signs that things were spiraling out of control. One evening after work, as we walked home together, Rosemary confided in me about a recent encounter with Mr. Bernard. "He asked me to meet him after hours to discuss my career," she said hesitantly. "Did he say why?" I asked, my heart racing. She hesitated before answering. "He mentioned wanting to help me secure a promotion." But it felt different this time. The knot in my stomach tightened as she spoke. It was becoming clear that Mr. Bernard's intentions were not purely professional anymore. That night, as I lay in bed, I couldn't shake the feeling that Rosemary was walking a dangerous path, a path that could lead to heartbreak or worse. The next day at work, everything changed when an email circulated around the office about an upcoming meeting where Mr. Bernard would address recent complaints regarding favoritism and workplace conduct. The atmosphere shifted drastically. Whispers filled the air as everyone speculated about what would happen next. The day of the meeting arrived, and the atmosphere in the office was tense. Everyone was buzzing with speculation about what Mr. Bernard would say. I could feel the weight of uncertainty pressing down on us as we gathered in the conference room, waiting for him to arrive. When Mr. Bernard finally walked in, he wore a serious expression. He glanced around the room, his eyes landing on Rosemary for a moment longer than anyone else. I could see her fidgeting in her seat, her fingers tapping nervously on the table. "Thank you all for coming," Mr. Bernard began, his voice steady. "I want to address some concerns that have been raised about favoritism within our team." A murmur spread through the room as everyone exchanged glances. It was clear that many had been waiting for this moment. I held my breath, wondering how Rosemary would react. "I understand that some of you feel there has been preferential treatment towards certain individuals," he continued, looking directly at Rosemary again. "I want to assure you that every decision made in this office is based on merit and performance." Rosemary's expression shifted from nervousness to determination. She sat up straighter, ready to defend herself if needed. However, Mr. Bernard added, "I also recognize that perceptions matter. It is crucial for us to maintain a fair and transparent work environment." As he spoke, I could see Rosemary's confidence wavering slightly. She had worked so hard to get where she was, but now it felt like everything was being questioned. "I will be implementing new policies to ensure that everyone has equal opportunities," Mr. Bernard declared. "We will have regular performance reviews and open discussions about promotions and project assignments. The room fell silent as everyone processed his words. While it sounded good in theory, I knew that actions spoke louder than words. After the meeting ended, I approached Rosemary as she walked out of the conference room, her face pale. "Are you okay?" I asked gently. She forced a smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. "I'm fine," she lied. "I just need to prove myself even more now." But deep down, I could sense her anxiety. The pressure was mounting, and I feared that Mr. Bernard's promises might not change anything for her. As days went by after the meeting, things didn't improve much. The tension among employees lingered, and many still whispered about Rosemary's relationship with Mr. Bernard. It felt like a storm was brewing, a storm that could sweep away everything she had worked for. One evening after work, Rosemary called me in a panic. "Alice, can you meet me? I need to talk." I rushed to our usual cafe, where I found her pacing back and forth, her hands shaking. "What happened?" I asked, concern flooding my voice. "I overheard Mr. Bernard talking to someone about me," she said breathlessly. "He said he needs me to play my cards right if I want to keep my position." My heart sank as I realized what she was implying. This wasn't just about work anymore. It was turning into something far more dangerous. "Rosemary," I said carefully, "you need to be careful. This isn't just about your career, it's about your safety and dignity." She looked at me with fear in her eyes, and for the first time, I saw doubt creeping into her confidence. "I know," she whispered. "But what am I supposed to do? I can't lose this job." In that moment, I realized how deep into this dangerous game she had gotten, and how hard it would be for her to find a way out. The following days felt heavy with uncertainty. Rosemary was on edge, and I could see the stress etched on her face. The meeting had done little to ease the tension in the office. If anything, it had intensified it. Employees were divided, and the whispers about her relationship with Mr. Bernard grew louder. One afternoon, I found Rosemary sitting at her desk, staring blankly at her computer screen. I approached her cautiously. "Hey, how are you holding up?" She sighed deeply, running a hand through her hair. "I don't know, Alice. It feels like everyone is watching me, waiting for me to slip up. Have you talked to Mr. Bernard about how you feel?" I suggested gently. She shook her head. "I can't. I need to keep this job. If I say anything, he might think I'm ungrateful or worse, like I can't handle the pressure." I understood her fear, but it worried me that she felt trapped. The office environment was becoming toxic, and I knew that the longer she stayed in this situation, the more dangerous it could become. That evening, as we walked home together, Rosemary's phone buzzed with a message from Mr. Bernard. She glanced at it and frowned. "He wants to meet tomorrow after work to discuss my progress," she said, her voice shaking slightly. "Are you sure that's a good idea?" I asked cautiously. "What if he tries to push for more than just work?" "I have to go," she replied firmly. This could be my chance to secure a promotion. That night, as I lay in bed, I couldn't shake my worries about what might happen during that meeting. The power dynamics between them were troubling. Mr. Bernard held all the cards, and Rosemary was playing a game that could easily turn against her. The next day dragged on as I waited for Rosemary to return from her meeting. When she finally walked through the door, her face was pale and drawn. "What happened?" I asked urgently. She sank into a chair, burying her face in her hands. "It was worse than I thought," she whispered. "Tell me," I urged gently. "He started talking about my career and how much potential he sees in me," she said slowly. "But then, he made some comments that made me uncomfortable, suggestions about taking our relationship to the next level if I wanted to succeed." My heart sank as I realized how serious the situation had become. This wasn't just about favoritism anymore. It was crossing into dangerous territory. "Rosemary," I said carefully, "you need to think about what this means for you." This isn't just about your job, it's about your safety and dignity. I know. She snapped back, frustration spilling over. But what am I supposed to do? If I walk away now, everything will be lost. Maybe you need to consider other options, I suggested softly. There are other jobs out there, places where you won't have to compromise yourself. She looked at me with tears in her eyes. But what if no one else wants me? What if this is my only chance? In that moment, I realized how deeply caught up she was in this web of ambition and fear, a fear that was suffocating her spirit. As we sat in silence, the weight of the choices before us hung heavily in the air. Rosemary stood at a crossroads, a point where she could either continue down this dangerous path or find the strength to reclaim her life. After that fateful meeting with Mr. Bernard, Rosemary was a bundle of nerves. I could see the fear in her eyes, and it broke my heart. She had worked so hard to achieve her dreams, but now those dreams felt like they were slipping away, replaced by a growing sense of dread. The next day, I found her sitting alone in the break room, her hands trembling as she stirred her coffee. "Rosemary," I said softly, taking a seat across from her. "You don't look well." "What did he say?" She looked up at me, her eyes filled with tears. "He made it clear that if I want to keep my position, I need to be more accommodating," she whispered, barely able to get the words out. My stomach dropped. "Accommodating how?" I asked cautiously. "He suggested that I should be more open to his ideas about our relationship," she said, her voice shaking. It felt wrong, Alice. I don't want to be just another trophy for him. I reached across the table and took her hand. "You need to get out of this situation, Rosemary. This isn't just about your job, it's about your dignity." "But what if I can't find another job?" she replied, panic rising in her voice. "What if no one else wants me? This is my chance. Is it really worth sacrificing your self-respect?" I asked gently. "You deserve better than this." As the days went by, the pressure mounted. Rosemary's anxiety deepened. She was becoming withdrawn and silent. The spark that once lit up her eyes was dimming, and it hurt to watch. One evening after work, we sat on a park bench under the fading light of the setting sun. "I can't keep doing this," she confessed, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I feel trapped." "Then you need to make a choice," I said firmly. "Do you want to stay in a situation that could destroy you? Or do you want to take control of your life?" Rosemary looked away, lost in thought. I could see she was battling with herself, caught between ambition and integrity. "I don't know what to do," she finally admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "Maybe it's time to talk to someone who can help," I suggested gently. "A lawyer or a counselor might give you clarity on your options." The idea seemed to resonate with her, and for the first time in weeks, there was a flicker of hope in her eyes. "You think so?" she asked. "Yes," I replied earnestly. "You deserve to feel safe and respected in your workplace." That night marked a turning point for Rosemary. She began researching her options and reached out for help, something she had been too afraid to do before. As days turned into weeks, Rosemary started attending meetings with a counselor who specialized in workplace issues. She learned about her rights and the steps she could take if Mr. Bernard continued to pressure her. But even as she began to regain some control over her life, the threat of confrontation loomed large. Would she be able to stand up for herself when the time came? The following week brought another meeting with Mr. Bernard, one that would determine not only the course of her career, but also her sense of self-worth. The day of the meeting with Mr. Bernard loomed over Rosemary like a dark cloud. She had spent the last few days preparing herself, gathering her thoughts, and the advice she received from her counselor. I could see the determination in her eyes, but I also sensed the fear that lingered just beneath the surface. "Are you ready for this?" I asked her as we sat together in the cafe before work. "I have to be," she replied, her voice steady but soft. "I can't let him control my life anymore." As we walked into the office, I felt a mix of anxiety and hope for my friend. This was her moment to take a stand, to reclaim her power and set boundaries. But I also knew that confronting someone like Mr. Bernard wouldn't be easy. When it was time for the meeting, Rosemary took a deep breath and walked into his office. I waited anxiously outside, pacing back and forth as minutes ticked by. I could only imagine what was happening behind that closed door. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Rosemary emerged from the office, her face pale but resolute. I rushed to her side. "What happened?" "I told him how I felt," she said, her voice shaking slightly. I made it clear that I wouldn't tolerate any more inappropriate comments or pressure regarding our relationship. My heart swelled with pride for her bravery. "And how did he react?" "He was surprised," she admitted, running a hand through her hair. "At first, he tried to downplay it, saying he was just looking out for my career. But I stood my ground. "Rosemary, that's amazing," I exclaimed, feeling a rush of relief. But then her expression shifted, and a shadow crossed her face. "But then he threatened me," she whispered. "What do you mean?" I asked, alarmed. "He said that if I didn't play along with his expectations, it could affect my position in the company," she explained, tears welling in her eyes. "He made it clear that he has the power to make or break my career." My heart sank as I realized how serious the situation had become. Mr. Bernard was using his authority to intimidate her, a classic tactic of manipulation. "Rosemary," I said firmly, "you need to document everything he said and consider filing a formal complaint with HR." She nodded slowly, still processing what had just happened. "I will," she promised. I just didn't expect him to react like that. As we left the office that day, Rosemary felt both empowered and terrified. She had taken a crucial step in standing up for herself, but now she faced an uncertain future, one where Mr. Bernard might retaliate. That night, we sat together at home as she drafted an email to HR outlining everything that had transpired between her and Mr. Bernard. It was a brave move, one that would put her career on the line but also protect her dignity. "This is your chance to take control," I encouraged her as she typed away. "You deserve to work in an environment where you feel safe and respected." With each word she typed, I could see Rosemary regaining some of the confidence that had been stripped away from her over the past months. She was no longer just a victim of circumstance. She was becoming an advocate for herself. As she hit send on the email, there was a moment of silence, a moment filled with both fear and hope for what lay ahead. After sending the email to HR, Rosemary felt a mix of relief and anxiety. She had taken a significant step toward reclaiming her life, but the uncertainty of what would happen next loomed over her like a dark cloud. Would Mr. Bernard retaliate? Would her career be jeopardized? The following day, as we entered the office, I noticed a tense atmosphere. Employees whispered in hushed tones, casting glances at Rosemary. It was clear that word had spread about her complaint. I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. I knew how quickly rumors could spiral out of control. "Are you okay?" I asked Rosemary quietly as we settled at our desks. She nodded, but her eyes betrayed her fear. "I'm just waiting to see how he reacts," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. As the day wore on, I watched as Mr. Bernard entered the office with an unusual demeanor, his usual confidence replaced by a tight-lipped expression. He glanced at Rosemary but quickly turned away, as if he were trying to avoid any confrontation. During lunch, I overheard two coworkers discussing the situation. I heard she filed a complaint against Mr. Bernard. One said incredulously, "That's brave or foolish." "Yeah, but what if he retaliates?" "He has the power to ruin her career," the other replied. Their words sent chills down my spine. The reality of workplace retaliation was all too real, and I couldn't help but worry for Rosemary's future. Later that afternoon, as we sat together in the break room, Rosemary's phone buzzed with a message from HR requesting a meeting to discuss her complaint. Her hands trembled as she read it. "This is it," she said, her voice shaking. "I have to go in and explain everything. I'll be right here waiting for you," I reassured her, trying to provide some comfort. As she left for the meeting, I felt a mix of pride and fear for my friend. She was standing up for herself, something many people never had the courage to do, but now she was entering a potentially hostile situation. When Rosemary returned from her meeting with HR, her face was pale and drawn. "What happened?" I asked urgently. "They were supportive," she said slowly, "but they also warned me about the possibility of retaliation from Mr. Bernard. My heart sank as I realized how serious this could get." The HR representative had explained that retaliation could take many forms: demotions, negative performance reviews, or even being passed over for promotions. It was a harsh reality that many employees faced when they dared to speak out against wrongdoing. "I don't know if I can handle this," Rosemary admitted, tears welling in her eyes. "What if he tries to ruin my career?" "Rosemary," I said firmly, "you have rights. They can't just punish you for standing up for yourself." But deep down, I knew that the fear of retaliation often prevented people from voicing their concerns in the first place. It created a toxic work environment where employees felt powerless and afraid. As days turned into weeks, Rosemary remained on edge. She received subtle hints from Mr. Bernard, snide comments during meetings, and increased scrutiny on her work. It was clear he was trying to undermine her confidence while maintaining an air of plausible deniability. One afternoon, while we were having coffee together, she confided in me about how difficult it had become to focus on her work. "I feel like I'm walking on eggshells," she said softly. "Every little mistake feels like it could be used against me." "It's not fair," I replied angrily. "You deserve to work in an environment where you feel safe and respected." But as much as we talked about it, the reality remained. Workplace retaliation was real and dangerous. As the weeks passed and tensions continued to rise, Rosemary faced an important decision: whether to continue fighting against Mr. Bernard or start looking for another job altogether. As the weeks dragged on, Rosemary felt the weight of her decision pressing down on her. The atmosphere in the office had become increasingly hostile. Mr. Bernard's subtle jabs and passive-aggressive comments were taking a toll on her mental health. She was exhausted, and I could see the spark that once lit up her eyes flickering dangerously low. One afternoon, as we sat in our favorite cafe, Rosemary looked at me with a mix of determination and fear. "I've been thinking, Alice," she said slowly. "Maybe it's time for me to leave this job." I felt a rush of relief mixed with concern. "Are you sure?" "It's a big decision. I can't keep living like this," she replied, her voice steady. "I've fought hard for my dignity, but I can't let Mr. Bernard control my life anymore. I deserve to work in a place where I feel valued and safe." Her words resonated deeply with me. I had watched her struggle for so long, and it was clear that staying in this toxic environment was only going to drain her spirit further. "Have you thought about where you might go next?" I asked carefully. "I've started looking at other opportunities," she said, a hint of excitement creeping into her voice. "There are companies that align with my values and where I can grow without compromising myself." That night, Rosemary took the plunge and submitted her resignation letter to HR. It was a bold move, one that would free her from the suffocating grip of Mr. Bernard and his manipulative tactics. The following week, as she prepared for her last day at Bernard & Co., I could see a sense of relief washing over her. She was finally taking control of her life again. On her last day, Rosemary walked into the office with newfound confidence. She greeted colleagues with genuine smiles and thanked them for their support during her time there. It was bittersweet. While she was leaving behind familiar faces, she was also stepping into a future filled with possibilities. As she packed up her belongings, I could see the weight lifting off her shoulders. "I'm really doing this," she said, disbelief mingling with joy. After saying goodbye to our coworkers, we stepped out of the office together for the last time. The sun shone brightly overhead, illuminating the path ahead of us. "I feel free," Rosemary said as we walked down the street. "It's like a weight has been lifted off my chest." "Because it has," I replied, smiling at her transformation. "You stood up for yourself when it mattered most." In the weeks that followed, Rosemary focused on herself, taking time to heal and rediscover who she was outside of work. She networked with professionals in her field and explored new job opportunities that aligned with her values. Eventually, she landed an interview at a company known for its positive work culture and commitment to employee well-being. When she received the job offer, it felt like a victory not just for her career but for her spirit. On her first day at the new job, Rosemary walked into the office with confidence and excitement. As she settled into her new role, I could see the light returning to her eyes, a light that had dimmed under Mr. Bernard's shadow. "Thank you for being there for me through all of this," she said one evening as we celebrated over dinner. "I'll always be here for you," I replied warmly. "You showed incredible strength by standing up for yourself." Rosemary had learned valuable lessons about ambition, boundaries, and self-worth through her journey. She realized that true success isn't just about climbing the corporate ladder. It's about maintaining integrity and finding fulfillment in what you do. As we raised our glasses in celebration, I knew this was just the beginning of a new chapter in Rosemary's life, a chapter filled with hope, strength, and endless possibilities.